The European cinema of the 1940s was dominated by World War II and the post-war reconstruction. Major film companies were the principal combatants of the war and to some degree were devoted to the war effort. The war caused a lot of hardships. Many homes were destroyed and people had no food or job. The typical family seemed to struggle. It was a dark time in the world. As a result, little movies sprang out due to the post-war era. In the Soviet Union, the film industry was subject to the ideas of the party line. Interestingly, Joseph Stalin, a brutal and atrocious tyrant that he was, took an interest in film. Loved many American Western films, but disliked the Soviet Union's Golden Age films and labeled them as formalism. Those were usually by directors Eisenstein, Pudovkin, Vertov, and Dovzhenko. Many films during the 1930s were usually dramas filled with patriotic speeches. Those movies usually had no artistry behind it and were usually safe. Those directors of those films were cited as honored artists of the Republic. As World War II was almost over, new themes were introduced. When the Nazi invasion seemed imminent, Stalin ordered the film studios to produce national patriotic films that dealt with historic pre-revolutionary heroes of Mother Russia. One of these movies was Alexander Nevsky by Eisenstein, a historical drama about the Russian army's defeat of German invaders during the 13th century. This Soviet heroic film was intended by director Sergei Eisenstein to serve as a contemporary warning to Adolf Hitler. The invaders, wearing armor and terrifying helmets resembling gargoyles and fierce animals, are ultimately defeated by resilient Russian army in great battle on a frozen lake. The ice cracks under the weight of the German armor. It was not until the death of Stalin in 1953 that the Soviet cinema began to grow slowly, with alert on the international scale. Andrei Tarkovsky was the next big-time director in Soviet cinema. Ivan's first film, My Name is Ivan, won the top prize at the Venice Film Festival in 1962 for its sensitive drama and visually striking portrayal of a Soviet boy spying behind enemy lines. He was an avant-garde style filmmaker, work that is experimental, unconventional, different, and innovative. His style had dreams, visions, stories that would reach one's subconscious, intellectual, and sophistication. He made 7 movies in 25 years. My Name is Ivan, Andrei Rublev, Solaris, The Mirror, Stalker, Nostalgia, and The Sacrifice. Tarkovsky films were often symbolic films about the spirit of man, values, highly personal, symbolic films. The last movie, The Sacrifice, was praised internationally. He believed that one can reach the subconscious of man through the cinematic arts. Despite his great talents, most of Tarkovsky's films were criticized by the Soviets. As a result, he had to re-edit, cut some scenes out of the movie. In 1983, he went to Italy and stayed there till his death from cancer. In the Soviet Union, there was a sharp break in policies around 1985, the beginning of the Gorbachev era of openness and restructuring, and for the first half of the decade, movies were still dominated by the old-style values of the Brezhnev era. Late in the 20th century, Soviet filmmakers found themselves with more freedom than ever before. Thus, movies that were denied filming or were suppressed finally were removed out of the shelves. Some movies were made 20 years before they could reach an audience. Movies such as Alexander Askoldov's Commissar were considered ideologically incorrect. The movie was originally made in 1967, but released in 1988. The movie portrays Jewish religious values in a positive light. Similarly to the United States, Russian movies in the late 20th century are more profit-oriented, with less artistic needs than early Russian films. With the exception of a few movies such as Oscar winner for Best Foreign Film, Burned by the Sun, The Barber of Siberia, and Vladimir Menshov's Moscow Does Not Believe in Tears. The movie is about a kind, warm-hearted people that suffer and try to cope with everyday universal problems. Cultural propaganda movies were dead and extinct. During the 19th century and 20th century, Russia brought all types of art into the whole new level. It's not surprising that the Russian movies not only inspired filmmakers worldwide, but set the tone for the highest quality of movies on the international scale.